podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
This is Anything But Footy, the Olympic and Paralympic podcast covering the games all the time rather than once every 4 years. I'm John.
And I'm Michael, and we may be approaching the end of another Olympic year, but never fear, there's another one just around the corner.
But what a year 2024 has been for us personally, for Team GB, for Paris, who totally delivered. And what better way to look back than to speak to one of the Team GB medal winners?
Yep, coming up, we are joined by a very special guest on this final podcast of the year, one of Aquatic GB's record-breaking divers.
And as Michael said, we'll look ahead to the next Olympics, which frankly is little more than a year away.
And we would always love to hear what you have to say about Olympic and Paralympic sport. You can get in touch with us, see what we're about anytime. You can find Anything But Footy across all the social media platforms. Just search for us there. Or you can also find us on our recently updated website where you can watch, you can listen, and you can read all about Anything But Footy at anythingbutfooty.com.
So it's official, well, according to a survey from the IOC itself anyway, that Paris 2024 was, in the words of Thomas Bach, the outgoing Olympic president, a massive success and the most followed Olympics ever. 84% of potential worldwide audience saw some part of the games. That's 5 billion people.
And I'm pretty certain that a fair proportion of those 5 billion people listen to us talking about the Olympic Games, not just on this podcast, but on official Olympic broadcaster talkSPORT 2, which broadcasts the games for the very first time back in the summer. But the stats show, on average, each viewer watched around about 9 hours of coverage, up 20% on previous games. Social media saw 412 billion engagements.
Wow.
That is an increase of 290% on Tokyo. That is phenomenal, and I think goes in part to explain why the IOC have the strategy that they have in terms of trying to get younger people engaged and bringing in new, younger focused disciplines and sports. Meanwhile, 95% of the athletes, and let's not forget, it's about the athletes, rated their experience of Paris 2024 as good or satisfactory.
Well, let's speak to one of them, one of the 65 medal winners for Team GB at Paris 2024. He was part of the record-breaking British divers as Aquatics GB made history by winning medals in all 4 synchronised diving events. And I'm very glad to say that Anthony Harding joins us now. Anthony, were you one of those athletes that said it was good or satisfactory?
I would definitely say it's more than satisfactory. I had an amazing time in Paris. It was my first Olympics, so maybe I have a bit of a not as good a wider knowledge on the Olympics, but I had an amazing time. There was obviously little things in the village that were not great, i.e. the food and stuff. But overall, I had an amazing time. Came away with the medal, which was one of the highlights of my Olympics. And yeah, the iconic stadiums and scenery was unbelievable.
And you mentioned the fact that it was your first. Was it everything that you thought it might be?
Yeah, I remember it starting and it all just hitting me. I remember leading up to my competition and trying to relax and playing my video game on my phone and it coming up with the Olympic medal table. And you just couldn't really escape it. You when you're in it, you just can't get away from the fact that everyone's going to be watching. Your friends and family all care about this one moment, and to you it's just another competition.
John and I are old men, so we remember the time when you watched the Olympic Games on the television or listened to the Olympic Games on the radio. Diving didn't really get much of a look in, didn't get much of a mention because there was nobody from this country who was any good at it. But you're a young man. I guess you've always grown up with the sport being one of the things you look out for in the Olympic Games. So what are your first kind of memories of watching an Olympics, watching diving? Where did it all start?
Yeah, my biggest inspiration was definitely on Taylor and Peter Waterfield back in 2004 when they got a silver medal. But I can't really remember much from back then. But the biggest highlight was Tom's medal in London. I remember everyone celebrating and jumping in the pool at the end of that competition. But watching Jack and Chris when I was about 16, I went specialised in that event. and that event really mattered to me. And I watched it back in 2016 and was just blown away with what is achievable. And to be Jack's partner in Paris really is something special that is crazy to grow up watching your idol and then end up competing against with him and win a medal.
And I've told Jack this many times, but I find him a very fine young man and individual, and slightly jealous that you get to work with him every day, because I think he is a top guy. But what was it about diving and the sport that first attracted you? Was it seeing Olympic moments, or was there just something else that brought you to it?
I was quite competent as a kid, and my mum just got me into swimming, and I was pretty good at it. And they just said, "What can you do next?" Which they said there's a local diving pool, which unfortunately isn't there anymore. And I think the lack of facilities that are in the country now is worrying, because I think a lot of athletes do come from grassroots kind of clubs. That I think it's important to reach those, because it is a talented sport. I think you have to have a talent, and to find those talented kids, I think you need a wide range of places to find those. But that's kind of how I got into it, and I fell in love with just jumping off 3 meters. I remember just jumping off and felt like I was flying and achieving something that was something I was scared of and something unknown that gave me the love of the sport.
But it's quite a difference from being, well, I'm quite good at this as a kid, to getting to an Olympics. How did that kind of work its way out? Because from my understanding is you kind of were doing it from the age of 6, and then also having to travel all the way over to Leeds as well.
Yeah, I got quite fortunate that my parents committed their whole life to me and traveling to Leeds when I was around 10 years old. But also that when I was 12, I got into a squad with a Chinese coach, which had Matty Lee, Lois Toulson, myself, and one other diver in this small squad at 12 years old. And 3 of us have become Olympic medalists, and Matty Lee is a champion. So I think that is definitely one of the things I definitely take as that took my level quite high. And then after 16, I then went alongside and worked with Jack, which I also think benefited me for the last 8 years to get to his level and work alongside him and be so similar. Because I think it is important to maybe copy or see the world's best and train very similar. And that's kind of, I think, the basics of how I became as good as I am. But obviously a lot of hard work goes into it, and training 6 times a week and for the last 8 to 14 years is been hard work.
So, Andy, I assume that you're a firm believer that having inspirational people, you talked about Jack being your hero, you talked about Tom Daley, that having inspirational people is great to bring on the next generation, because there are some people who say, well, it doesn't matter. You don't need that. You just need good coaches or facilities as well. But it's probably a bit of everything, isn't it?
100%. Working alongside the world's best in Jack and with Lois, it strives you and pushes you every day to become the best. So if you don't have the team around you and something to look up to, then you're never going to be able to see or achieve the top, basically. Because I think the way people say it's obviously you're a small fish in a big pond or a big fish in a small pond. And I think you need to be a small fish in a big pond and grow and develop into the best or the big fish in that pond.
Let me talk to you a little bit about pressure. And I've got a couple of questions where pressure is concerned. Was there a certain amount of pressure? And I had this conversation with Noah Williams, obviously alongside Tom Daley, of being alongside someone like Jack who, had been there, done it. You followed him carrying a flag into the Commonwealth Games. You've probably seen his Olympic gold medals and his other medal collection as well. So was there a certain amount of pressure on being paired up with Jack?
100%. I remember when he sat me down and said, I wanted to be your synchro partner. And I knew in that moment that the Olympics, or even just going, was real and could really happen. It wasn't until maybe my first World Championships where we medaled, where I really thought, okay, we can really strive for a podium here at the Olympics. But I think all the experience that I gained in those 3 years leading up to Paris made it a lot easier. I think the first year I had a lot of pressure on I think being alongside Jack and kind of um, proving myself as a top athlete, and that kind of, I did that in the first year with Commonwealth, World Championships and Europeans, that really helped leading up to Paris. So I think some of that pressure was eased off in Paris, but the first year was definitely difficult.
And let me talk about pressure on the competition, because we know that there's lots of different sportsmen and women of different sports listen to this podcast. But if you make a mistake in a pool hockey game, you're probably not going to be punished for your Olympic dreams for it. But you've got 6 dives that are over in the blink of an eye. And unless you're very, very, very good, if you make a mess of one of them, you know your medal chances have gone for the day.
The difference between first and third was 8 points, which is less than 5% of the difference of the total score. So it's the difference between being Olympic champion and Olympic bronze medalist. So, but before the competition, I actually went flat on one of my dives, on the hardest dives, and I struggled to kind of train just before the event because of the nerves and stuff, but managed to really pull it out for the competition. And I think it is important to be able to step up in those moments, and I think that's happened for me for a lot of competitions through my career at junior competitions such as Youth Olympics. So I think you kind of experience that kind of pressure and competition routine with only having 6 dives, or however many it is, that you kind of practice that.
And can you treat it as just a normal competition? Or as you said earlier, everything says it's the Olympics, it's the Olympics, it's the Olympics.
Nothing can prepare you for that day. And we did everything we could to do that competition. And we practiced 6 weeks in advance. Every Friday when that competition was going to happen, 11 a.m., we did a run through every week. And that massively helped. But when you're standing on that board and there's Olympic rings right in front of you and there's 100 cameras behind you, it really, and like be 1,000 people in the stand with your friends and family, it really does dwell on you. But I'm a person who really gets really narrow-minded in the moment in the competition, that I can't really even talk or look at Jack, which really helps me focus, and I don't really like those distractions. But yeah, no, nothing can prepare you for that. But the sheer amount of pressure from everything is hard to handle. But you find your routines, and you experience other competitions such as the Commonwealths, for me, that helps in those kind of Olympic moments.
And did you know going into that final, that 3-meter synchro final, that if you won a medal, you would make history, that Aquatics GB would have won medals in every one of those 4 synchronized diving events because of the success that you'd seen with your teammates?
Yeah, we had a meeting 2 days or after the women's 10 meter, I think it was, with my coach and Jack, and we spoke about it being that we've had 3 medals out of 3, and that we've hit our medal target. And our coaches were mentioning that the pressure's off, and we were like, no, this is more pressure. But I kind of try to dwell down those kind of medal moments for us, and trying to not make it bigger than it is, because I didn't want to kind of overexcite me and put more pressure on myself that is going to mean everything if I do win a medal.
How do you prepare for that extra attention that you have on that Olympic stage? Because I've been to British Diving Championships in Sheffield before, obviously Sandwell, and I know you had the Commonwealth Games experience, which being at home was obviously huge, I imagine, in the learning curve. But the Olympic Games, you suddenly got all those cameras in your face immediately after you get out of the pool. You just want to turn around to those guys and go, just leave me alone, sod off, will you? I mean, how do you can prepare your dives, I get that, but how do you prepare for everything else that goes on around it?
Fortunately, just having synchro and that one final, you kind of can do your own routine and training away from all the media stuff just before the competition. It's kind of after the competition you can kind of deal with that if it comes. But I didn't really have much practice in that kind of area or kind of expectation of what was going to happen. But I remember getting a video from my family and friends saying like a good luck video, and I remember seeing that and going, they've never sent me anything like this before. Even though I've done the Commonwealths and World Championships, I'm going, I can't watch that. So I left that video. I didn't watch it until after. But it is difficult to know what exactly going to happen whilst you're at the Olympics just before the competition, and how you're going to deal with that. So I think I've learned a lot from my first Olympics of how to do better, or ideally how I want the Olympic experience to go. But yeah, like I said, nothing really can prepare you for it, and you've got to just try and take it as it comes and try and deal with it best you can.
I've totaled up. I interviewed or recorded around about 150 interviews during the 17 days of Paris. And I reckon if I were to listen back to them, about 148 of those would start with guys like you going, it hasn't sunk in yet, when I've asked them about what it's like to win a medal. So with a little bit of time passing, has it sunk in yet?
It's cliche, it hasn't, but it definitely has. But I definitely catch myself in moments walking in the supermarket and going, I'm an Olympic medalist, and no one knows, or no one really, but I can assure myself and confidently be like, I've done it. I've reached the top in what I've done. That I can go into any walk of life now and take that with me, and show that my hard work, or I will put in the work to become the best in what I do.
How many days since Paris 2024 have you spoken about Paris 2024? Because I know, like last week, you were at a school, talked to the youngsters about how your journey and how to inspire them. Is it every hour of every day?
I do tend to watch back my competition quite a few times in bed, just rewatch, especially my hardest dive that I absolutely nailed. But I do love going into schools and inspiring kids. But with my friends, and they kind of take the Mickey sometimes. And
do they literally say enough is enough?
Yeah,
just stop it.
Yeah, they do. When I'm playing PlayStation or something, I say I'm kind of a big deal, guys, and then they just laugh about it. But it is hard to I guess decompress from having such a high. But I've done some work with my psychologist and decompress the moment, and I can kind of identify what worked well and what I enjoyed, and the bad parts too, in those pressure moments. But yeah, not as much as maybe I'd like, because I think me and my friends and family were out in Paris, and I don't think we got to spend quality time in Paris. So I would like to spend this Christmas and New Year really celebrating.
I was going to say, we're coming to the end of the year. Does it feel like a lifetime ago that it happened, or does it feel like yesterday?
Honestly, it didn't even feel like Christmas. I was putting up the Christmas decoration thinking it feels like October and November. Like, I don't know if that's just because I prolonged my summer, and it just feels like everything's a month or 2 months behind. But yeah, it doesn't even feel like Christmas, and it's been such a long summer and a brilliant one that I haven't really decompressed from it all.
Well, I'm glad that you are still watching the videos back of your competition, because to be honest, I'm still listening back to the commentaries that I did. I mean, I listen back to my commentary on Noah Williams and Tom Daley probably 3 times a week. Maybe the commentary on Andy Murray that I did probably twice a day. I mean, to be honest with you, it's an amazing thing to have lived through, and it must have been an amazing thing for you to have lived through as an athlete and winning a medal. One of the things I think I learned in Paris was to stop asking athletes about what happens next. And Simone Biles famously tweeted about that, because we are very keen to move you guys on in the immediate aftermath of what you've just done to what happens next. But having had a few months to reflect now, what are the plans for 2025? What is the New Year's resolution?
Yeah, I really wanted this year to be kind of no expectations, no pressure, just kind of like ease back into it, get a routine. And if I'm really fit and ready to go, then I can compete again at World Championships. But my coach really wants to get back on the horse and get back an individual, and really push for the next 4 years, because I am still young. I'm a bit younger than Jack and the rest of the guys. I really can push on to the next Olympics and hopefully be there in synchro and individual. So I guess in the long term, that's the goal, and that's what's next. But my coach, well, I haven't mentioned, but my coach left Edinburgh, so I've now recently got a new coach, who's the one kind of pushing me to start and get going again, which is in Sheffield. So at the minute, for the short term, it's trying to relocate to Sheffield, and get my dives back and get into shape, get a routine, mentally, still be good and cope there. And yeah, hopefully for the World Championships, I can be back on the podium with Jack if we're both fit and ready.
Yeah, I think we're nearly time up with you on this recording, and I think it would be a little bit unfair to ask obviously about what Jack is going to do next, because that's obviously for Jack, but hopefully you'll be competing alongside him. But just a quick word about, obviously Tom Daly has said that he is not going to compete, although I don't believe him. I think he'll come back for LA. I mean, it's at home, isn't it? It's around the corner. But just a quick word about the likes of Tom and Jack and what they have done for setting diving up in this country as one of the major sports.
I think Jack does go under the radar a little bit about what he has done. I think Tom does get a lot of the limelight, and so he should. He's had a great career, and I still think he's got more to give. But both of them equally have done and won so much, and it is not recognised as well as I think it should. But being in the villages with them is just crazy. I even see Matt Whitlock there and Andy Murray in the villages and Jim blow me away. And I spend every day with Jack, and it's a real privilege for me to be able to have someone like that to push me every day. And one of the reasons why I'm so good, and I'm so grateful that he believed in me to be alongside him and actually put his medal chances in also my hands, which is a very nice feeling. And yeah, I couldn't be. He's like a brother to me, and I remember speaking to someone about that, and he is like a brother. We're not best mates. We don't get on. We sometimes fall out, but he is. I do love him, and he's like a brother. And it's great to have him, and hopefully he does carry on, and that would be the best situation for me too going forward, and hopefully we can win even more medals.
Final couple of questions then to finish with. Does LA feel like a long time away?
Yeah, this cycle has only been 3. That felt like a long time. It's my first kind of real Olympic cycle, going World Championships every year. But 4 definitely feels like a long way. I kind of do want this year to be a chilled one, a step back to really push on more for the next 3 after this.
I hope your coach is listening to that. And you mentioned about Christmas. Final question. You mentioned you put your decorations up, although you've got to sort out, what you're doing in Sheffield and moving and all that kind of stuff. But what are you doing for Christmas?
Yeah, I do really want to fully celebrate the past year with my friends and family. Open up a bottle of champagne that I've got from Team GB and really celebrate what me and my family have put in for the last 18 years. And then in the new year, look to moving, then really push on, and hopefully a new kind of journey individually for me, with also synchro being there too.
Well, Anthony Harding, Olympic medalist from Paris 2024, on the final episode of Anything But Footy in this brilliant Olympic year as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great Christmas to you and all the people that are important to you, and a happy new year. And we'll catch up in 2025, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, and yeah, happy new year and happy Christmas.
So good to have a medal winner on the podcast. As Michael said, the last one of 2024, but we're not quite done yet. This is Anything But Footy, the Olympic and Paralympic podcast, and 2025 may not be an Olympic year, but we're not far away from the next one.
This is Anything But Footy, the Olympic and Paralympic sport podcast. On the way, we are going to be looking at who might replace Thomas Bach at the head of the IOC.
Yeah, but the sporting schedule for the next Olympics, which is little more than a year away, is out. We are talking Milano Cortina in 2026, the Winter Olympics, and Milan is going to host the figure skating, speed skating, short track and ice hockey, and also the opening ceremony in the iconic San Siro, which I actually went on a stag tour week weekend once. So it was my stag do. I went round the San Siro Stadium. So I'm quite looking forward to going back, to be honest. Cortina, women's alpine skiing, skeleton, bob, luge and curling, which starts actually 2 days before the opening ceremony. Tickets are available from February 6th when the year to go comes around, but you need to sign up by January the 15th, 2025. The Olympics is from the 6th to the 22nd of February, 2026. Nearly 3,000 top-class athletes competing for 116 Olympic golds across 19 days. And then the Paralympics is from the 6th to the 15th of March. More than 600 athletes competing for 79 Paralympic titles.
Quite a lot to unpack there. Most of all, that you had a week-long stag in
weekend.
Milan.
A weekend.
I thought you said a week long.
We had a weekend in Milan, and part of it was going around the San Siro because Norwich City played there once when we were in Europe. There we go.
Jeremy Goss. Is that?
It was that era, but that was Munich.
That's Bayern Munich, was it?
Yeah. And when we then played into Milan in the round afterwards, and so that's why we went around the San Siro. Okay,
I went to The Hague for my stag, and the proximity to Amsterdam is just coincidental. What? Amsterdam is a former Olympic host city. Why else would I have wanted to visit the attractions?
I can't think of anything else.
Big Olympic year to come, 2025. There's no actual games, but the IOC will be hearing from the candidates for the IOC presidency. Now, the date for the diary, if you want to hear from them all, is Thursday, the 30th of January. All the candidates will be speaking. They include, of course, Lord Sebastian Coe. They will present to the IOC members in the morning, and in the afternoon, then we think what will happen is Italy will be confirmed as the host nation for the 2028 Winter Youth Olympics at the 143rd IOC session. And the decision on the presidency, that will actually take place in the 144th IOC session, which is going to be in March. We'll be following that fairly closely in the new year.
I think we will. It's a huge decision, isn't it? I mean, I remember when Thomas Bach came in, obviously replacing Jacques Rogge, who was there for London 2012 and the like. So there's been a lot of, and it was one of the questions on a news conference that I was in. They were beginning to talk about legacy of Thomas Bach, and there'll be a lot of criticism for him for what he's done and where he's taken the Olympics, China, several times, etc. But also what he's had to deal with in terms of COVID, cancelling a games or delaying a games for the first time since Second World War. It's been quite a tumultuous presidency, really, and it'll be interesting to see where they go next. Will it be Sebastian Coe, which obviously from our perspective we would, I'm sure, like that to be, but other names on there: Samaranch, Kirsty Coventry of Zimbabwe, I know is Thomas Bach's one of his deputies, even Prince Faisal Al Hussein as well. So it literally could be anyone. It could be 7 names, but it could be anyone.
Yeah, and 2036 obviously is the next sort of summer hosting decision that needs to be made. And as we know, the process has changed somewhat since London bid and won the Olympic Games, of course. So we know LA, we know Brisbane. 2036, I've been reading a lot about South Africa, and obviously a lot about India. FIFA, I think as we are recording this, are naming their FIFA World Cup host, the Men's World Cup, for Saudi Arabia.
In 34.
I'm sure that the IOC will be looking at that part of the world for future hostings as well. So, yeah, I think there's quite a lot, as there always is, I think, on the plate of the future of the next IOC president as well. So it'll be an interesting one to follow and to see who gets the job and how they then go about approaching it.
One of the big things as well will be whether boxing will be in LA, and Thomas Bach was talking about that. He was asked about boxing again, with the fact that they have said, they've staged it, the IOC, for the last few summer games, haven't they, in Rio and in Paris and Tokyo, and they've said we're not going to put it on again. It needs to have a world federation leading amateur boxing. He said it's very easy for the national federations of boxing. If they want their athletes to win Olympic medals, then they know what they have to do, is basically what he's been saying. He says the IOC are watching World Boxing, which is another federation that the GB Boxing are part of, and others around the world. And he says, at the right time, we will see if that organisation meets the criteria required. That was his quote. But he was very categoric. He said, it cannot be the IBA. That story is over.
So it's Christmas. It's our final podcast of the year. We're already beginning to talk about 2025, but it's been a great year for us, I think. Obviously, being such a central part of the organisation, the planning, the preparation of the Olympic Games coverage on talkSPORT. And we've spoken before about how we basically came up with the idea and went to them and said, you can do it. And they went ahead and they did it and they involved us. And, that's been, for me, certainly as far as my career is concerned. So I'll never forget one of the best bits, one of the highlights.
You've got Daley Thompson on speed dial, so that's a pretty good achievement for 2024 in my lifetime.
I used to say, when I have that dinner party conversation, who's the most famous person you have in your phone book on your mobile phone? For me now to be able to scroll and have Catherine Granger, Kelly Holmes, and Daley Thompson is quite the flex to people of our age.
Yes, yeah.
But I mean, as I said, it is that time of reflection, and we talked about it a little bit in our interview with Anthony about how you reflect. What are your kind of take homes now? How do you look back at what you did, what we did in 2024 with the Olympics?
And what I want to be able to do here is say something different from what we said when we reviewed the games. When you listen back to our pods from the Olympics, when we were there in Bercy, one of our favourite ever places, that's where we'll have to go back at some point in the future, me and you, for a couple of drinks. But to say something different, because I could easily sit here and say to you, my highlight is still sitting down with Sir Andy Murray. It's something that I've always wanted to do and never had the opportunity to sit down with him. And frankly, he won't remember us, but I don't care. I spent 10 minutes in his company. And I saw him a couple of times after that in mixed zones, and it was great. So, but I've kind of said that before. So I'd like to say something on reflection that you look back on and go, wow. And I think maybe the one thing I would say is the interview that we did with Drew Barron, from CEO of Aquatics GB, who said that they found it really hard. And there were several issues. Anthony kind of alluded to it a little bit in the interview there, that Paris wasn't quite as seemingly serene as I thought it was, and maybe I got caught up in the moment a little bit. It was an English speaking pretty much games. It was in Europe. We didn't have to get on a plane to go there. It felt like home. It felt a bit London. It felt a bit kind of like I know what we're doing, although we were doing something that was totally different and totally new to us, and the challenges that brought. So I wonder whether in hindsight, when I look back, was it the greatest games, and was it as good as London? Maybe I think at the time, I think I said it was. Maybe I would put it on a par now. I don't know.
Should we have been more journalistically rigorous when we were out there? Is that not a story that, if we hadn't been as caught up in the whole we're at the Olympics and we're on the radio doing it for the first time for UK commercial radio, is that a story we should have discovered while we were out there? You're the journalist amongst the two of us.
No, I'm trying.
You're the newsman.
But we were doing a different job. So we weren't covering it as news people. You were a commentator. I got told I was a commentator, and I've always said to you, I'm never a commentator. I've never done it. And actually, I quite enjoyed it and would like to do a bit more moving forward, because I felt like this is a challenge and it was something I really wanted to do. So I think it's a really fair question, but I would say that we were there covering it for a sports radio station, and we were covering the sport. Now that's again, people can throw that at us and go, well, that's not journalistically very strong, or you would probably say that Saudi Arabia is a good host for an Olympics. I don't think it is personally. I think it will be, but I don't think it will be for a number of reasons. And I don't think it's a good host, but it will be, like you said, with the FIFA World Cup. There are many reasons why it shouldn't happen, but it will happen. Now, we can sit here and go, should we question that? Or do we go and cover the sport? Because that's ultimately what we're being paid to do.
Yeah. It's just as you were talking there about coming up with something new, something different. And I wondered whether maybe did get just a little bit caught up. But I think that always happens. It's what we said before, isn't it? That when the sport starts, you do just sort of forget about some of those other issues. I mean, we've been critical there of Paris. we could be equally critical looking back at London about issues around security, ticketing. That was a huge issue in the first week of London, empty seats. And
I remember the whole visa system going at Wembley. Nobody could buy anything because they played the wrong national anthem out.
Yeah, so that London wasn't perfect either.
No.
And I think we sometimes forget that in our assessment of those games. And Paris, clearly, as we've been talking there, wasn't perfect.
I mean, I could talk to you about my hotel if you really wanted me to.
You talked to me about your hotel quite a lot when we were there, which is why we tended to meet at mine.
But yeah, well, exactly. But again, I could have made journalistically, I could have said, well, I could have found stories that other hotels were awful and blah, 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 blah. But it wasn't of interest. I didn't think it was that interesting to the people who were listening or viewing. And maybe the 5 billion people can't be wrong, can they? I don't know.
No, that's the thing I've said. I have no interest really at the Olympics of reading stories about people that are being paid to be there moaning about the transport system or their quality of their accommodation. That's just something that happens. I think that we had lots to be very proud of. I think we probably uncovered more stories in the interviews that we did. I think that the hard work that we have been putting in for over a decade came to fruition. And, even listening back to that interview there we did with Anthony, and he was talking about how they prepared by preparing at 11 o'clock on a Friday morning every week for weeks. Again, that's something I've learned now, and I'll be taking, I think, to the next game. So I think with all of these things, there's always lessons to be learned. I mean, it was a tremendous experience. One I'm not sure yet I've still got over completely.
Well,
I'll be honest.
I mean, you said to Anthony, you're still listening to your stuff, and rightly so, because for 10 years you have been the athletics correspondent for talkSPORT, and for the first time for 7-8 days you stood by the athletics track, the Olympic athletics track. It's not the British Athletics Championships in the nicest possible way. It's not the Diamond League in London. It's the Olympic Stadium athletics track. And you stood there and interviewed people coming off the athletics track. I mean, that is just an incredible thing to have done. Yeah,
it was. Well, I think it was something that I'm very proud that we put together from start to finish, really.
Yeah. So 2025, we have to look forward. As Anthony said, it's time to review. We've got to look forward as well. There's plenty coming up in 2025, to be fair.
Yeah, I think, and the Olympic cycles come around very quickly. 2025 for us, certainly, I think the first part of the year, we've got to put a huge focus on our winter sports and our winter athletes. We're going to have that 1 year to go to the next Winter Games. The last Winter Games weren't that good for Team GB. We know a couple of medals in curling. I'm more optimistic that the games in Italy will be a better games for Team GB, better time zone for British viewers as well. So, I certainly think that's got to be our focus, looking at, there's been great success already in snow sport this season. The curlers are well underway, of course, with their season as well. It doesn't really stop the skeleton and the bob teams as well. So, I think we've probably got to just turn our attention to those guys and give a bit more focus on those athletes and those sports, which is exactly why we do this podcast.
Yeah, no, absolutely well said. And we will carry on talking athletics, talking swimming, talking rowing, the Commonwealth Games to come in Glasgow as well in little more than a year as well. It's going to be plenty to get our teeth into. And I am privileged, Michael, just to say, to have worked with you and the whole talkSPORT team, but you in particular, and just say thank you so much for the past year, the past few years, because it's been absolutely incredible. And I just wanted to put that on the record.
So it sounds like we're finishing. We're not. We're definitely going forward to 2025.
We're having a Christmas break though, aren't we?
We are having a bit of a Christmas break. We're just allowing ourselves a moment of indulgence just to reflect on what was achieved by talkSPORT. And I tried to put a list together, I think, of all the people on air at talkSPORT who worked on that coverage, and I got to about 75, 80 names. Wow. Which sounds bigger than it felt at the time. It felt like we were doing it on a much smaller team, but there was about 75, 80 people, and then all the people behind the scenes as well, and most importantly the people listening. I guess as well, because without anyone listening there was no point doing it. So thank you for listening.
And that sums it up perfectly well. You can check out our socials, Anything But Footy, all our latest blogs. Michael has got a new one on there as well for you to check out, anythingbutfooty.com. It is a brand new website. As Michael said, you can see stuff, you can listen to stuff, and you can look back on quite the summer of sport for Anything But Footy and the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games. And stay with us. We are moving on to Milan and looking ahead to LA.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.